From CSDC, the Charter Schools Development Center.
An important part of the rules that the Brown Act provides is sometimes it can lead to uncomfortable interactions between the board and the public because the public wants the board to respond and the board cannot respond.
Welcome to Boarding Pass, your ticket to effective charter school governance. I'm Caitlin O'Halloran Heller, and more than 20 years ago, I got the bright idea that I was going to start a charter school. My son was in preschool, and I wanted to create a free Montessori charter school as a public education option in my small rural community. I said the words, I mean, really, how hard can it be? And 2 decades later, I know exactly how hard it is to build and maintain a high-quality charter school in California. So I'm going to take you down the path that I went down and help you learn everything you need to know to excel as a board member in a thriving charter school. Today, I would like to welcome Jennifer McQuarrie. Jennifer owns her own law practice and she represents charter schools throughout the state. She's a leading expert in California on charter school policy and legal issues. Jennifer also serves as a vital resource to CSDC as she engages as an advisor and guest instructor in nearly all of our seminar, webinar, and conference-style offerings. I'm delighted to talk with her today. Welcome to Boarding Pass, Jennifer.
Thank you, Caitlin.
So tell me a little bit about what first got you involved in the work of charter schools. How did you land on this as a job?
Well, it started back in 2003. I was working as a high-stakes litigator in a large international law firm and decided I needed a change of pace. And through some twists and turns, I found my way into the role of general counsel at a charter management organization in Sacramento.
Okay. And from there, rest is history, right? I think
Right.
all of us, once we get involved, we're just sort of hooked, and it takes us down the path we go down. So, now you had an interesting little side work that you did with Eric and CSDC, and you helped create some schools and some charter schools in Qatar. Can you tell me a little bit about that experience? I mean, that's pretty unusual even in the charter school world.
Sure. Yeah, I met Eric. He was on the board of directors of the charter management organization. And through that meeting, he had recruited me essentially to come and work for CSDC over in Qatar. They were doing a K-12 education reform. It was modeled after charter schools throughout the whole world. So it wasn't just the United States or California. CSDC was over there doing some consulting, helping the people who were writing the charters, helping them to draft them. And so I was the on-site consultant for CSDC through that process.
Wow, that's seriously interesting work. And do you ever follow up on how did it all turn out all these years later?
You know, a few years back, I looked into it, but I think things have, I actually check in with Eric a few times every maybe 4 years, and things aren't as clean as we were hoping, but it's still interesting to see what they were trying to do.
Sure, absolutely. So I brought you on today to our podcast to talk to our listeners a little bit about the Brown Act. The Brown Act, which is now mandatory for all charter schools and charter school boards. And I wondered if you'd start with just sort of a little history, background information about what is the Brown Act and why are we even subject to it?
Sure. So the Brown Act was legislation that was brought into California in 1953. So it's been here quite a long time. And essentially, what the Brown Act is intended to do is make open media or meetings of legislative bodies open to the public. It's a way to keep government accountable to the public and the people funding the government activities with taxpayer money.
And a few years ago, this has been something that the Brown Act was for, like you said, government agencies, city councils, that kind of stuff. And then a few years ago, they were like, oh, and now charter schools also, right? And so we have been brought into that. Some charter schools already follow the Brown Act, and that was part of their charter, but now it's mandatory. And so that's a little different for us.
That's right. So most charters before 2019, when the Brown Act explicitly was written to include charter schools, most charter schools were already following it as a condition of chartering. Their granting agencies would require it. But now, since 2019, it's clear that it does apply to charter schools, no matter whether they want to follow it or not.
Right. And I think they want to. I mean, because it's the law. We all want to follow the law. So let's start. I just sort of wanted to touch on a few of the most important things. When we talk about the Brown Act, and sort of as an aside, CSTC, on our website, we have a very long, very comprehensive series of modules that you worked on and I worked on, and that's presented in a way that is much more comprehensive. But in this podcast, I wanted to talk about just sort of highlights of things. And the first one is on the agendas. So part of the Brown Act is letting the public know that there is going to be a meeting. And so you have to post an agenda. So can you tell me just a little bit about what agendas should have in them, maybe, and where they should be posted?
Sure. So agendas need to have quite a bit of specific information, including the date and location of where the meeting's going to be held. It needs to provide information with regard to how individuals can access the meeting and the agenda to comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act. There is certain content that needs to be included if you are participating through teleconferencing as a board member. And really, what the agenda, the intent is to provide the public with enough information to inform them whether they want to actually come to the meeting and provide the board with their input, or they want to hear what the board is hearing about a specific item. So it really is about providing the public with notice as to what the local agency is hearing, what they're deciding, and that would include a charter school board. The agendas need to be posted in a location that is freely accessible to the public 24 hours a day and compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. So it can't be behind closed gates. It can't be upstairs unless there's a ramp. So that's one physical location. The other thing that it needs to be posted on the school's website, and it needs to be on the homepage in a prominent link.
And I'll tell you that when I meet with charter schools on other things, I will always check their website just to see if they have it posted, correctly, that it's not a drop-down menu with many little clicks to get to the agenda, that you can just get right to the agenda. And I'll say that that's something I think charter schools need to pay attention to, is whether or not they've actually met that, because it might be in there somewhere, but I might have to dig for it. And that's not how it's supposed to be accessible right now.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, so that's something I think people may want to take another look at their website. And then another area I think that board members get a little confused around is what is acceptable to talk about in closed session. And I know it's a limited list, and I know also that just because something's uncomfortable doesn't mean you can say, "Oh, let's move that to closed session." So, what things can we talk about in closed session?
Well, the things that you can talk about in closed session have to specifically be authorized by statute. So it includes things like litigation, pending litigation, anticipated litigation, includes things relating to personnel matters, whether it's termination, discipline, evaluations, hiring, firing, those sorts of things. There are some closed sessions that allow you to talk about labor negotiations, real property negotiations, public security issues, those sorts of things. But the very important thing to remember about closed sessions is that there has to be a statute that authorizes that.
Okay. And so if you're in a closed session, and this has happened to me before, somebody maybe not meaning to get sort of off track a little bit, maybe into an area that's not appropriate, it's okay as a board member, right, to say, hey, I think this is not something we should talk about here. If the board chair doesn't say it first, right?
That's
But
correct.
just letting people know. And that's sort of a remedy to if someone gets on a topic where you should not be, don't continue down that road, right? Just sort of cut them off a little bit.
That's right. So if you do find yourself in a closed session and there are conversations that are outside of what the closed session topic is, there should be a stoppage to that conversation. And if the board chair, like you say, isn't changing, enforcing that rule, then somebody else should. And sometimes if I'm in closed session as, legal counsel for a litigation closed session, I will remind people within the closed session about what the topic needs to, the topic can revolve around.
Okay, great. That's helpful because I think sometimes you hear it, at least for me, and I'm like, oh, can I say something? Should I? But you know that you're going down a path that you don't want to go any further down, and so that's good. That's good sort of counsel on that, to just say it if we experience it. And so let's talk about sort of the opposite then of closed session, which is public comment. So this is a time when all boards hear from the public in some variety. Maybe they're doing it all in the beginning, or maybe they're doing it before each agenda item. But what are some of the rules around public comment for board members? What should we know?
Well, the thing that is really important about public comment is that the public at a regular meeting can talk about during public comment anything that's within the board's subject matter jurisdiction. So they can talk about anything related to the school. It doesn't have to be on the agenda. And because there are rules about what the board can talk about if it's not on the agenda, you often will have a situation where someone from the public brings up a topic that's not on the agenda, so the board can't address it. So that's an important part of the rules that the Brown Act provides. Is sometimes it can lead to uncomfortable interactions between the board and the public because the public wants the board to respond and the board cannot respond. So important to just remember that the public can talk about whatever they want and the board is limited to what's on the agenda. With regard to public comment, that the public gets the opportunity to provide their comments before or during consideration of the matter. It can't be after the board makes a decision on something. So always just making sure that the public has the ability to provide access and their opinion to the board before the board actually makes a decision.
Okay, that's great. That's really helpful. And I think you're right. There's sometimes that awkward thing, or even as a board member, I want to say something. What do you mean this happened? Or, and you just sort of have to sit there quietly or direct staff. Could you please follow up on this and report back to us? And that's a little hard for board members sometimes, I think.
Yeah, sometimes what boards will do is they'll read at the beginning of the meeting what the public comment rules are, and there often is a description that the board can't respond to public comment if it's not on the agenda. So sometimes reading that in advance can provide a little bit of explanation so that the public's not frustrated by the board's inability to respond.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's a good suggestion as well. And sometimes in public comment, and this happened, at least it happened on the boards that I've been on more during the real, COVID lockdowns and the really tense times. But sometimes the public got abusive in their comments. What is an appropriate time to say to the public, we want to hear what you have to say, but you need to say it in a way that doesn't make us feel threatened? What's an appropriate response to that?
Well, that's a great question. I think that it really is up to the board as to when that conversation might take place. If you have a situation where you get public comment, a lot of public comment, and it might be contentious or argumentative or disruptive, you might put into your discussion of public comment sort of what the norms are as
Mm.
to what
Mhm.
what rules are in place with the actual board and the public comment rules there. The one thing that the board can't do is censor the public. You can limit disruptive behavior, and disruption is defined in statute, and then the board has the ability to warn the members of the public that their behavior is disruptive and they can be basically excluded from the meeting. But that would be a warning that takes place at the time with specific behavior that the member of the public is basically doing what they're doing. And then, the board member would give them an opportunity to stop that behavior before excluding them from the meeting. But if there's a lot of times where the public does present that disrupting behavior, the board should think about creating some rules about what the norms and expectations for participation are.
Okay, yeah, that's really helpful. I'm thinking back to one specific instance during COVID when I was chairing the meeting and there was a very angry parent. And I said, we're going to take a break and we're going to come back and we're going to see if we can do this differently. But the next step would have been to just shut down the meeting altogether. I mean, we couldn't function in that environment.
Right. And later legislation since that time has
Yes.
given you the ability to shut down that particular person rather than having to shut the entire meeting down.
Right. Yes, this was right. You're right. This was pre the legislation that
Mhm.
you're referencing. But yeah, it just as a board member, you're sitting there and it feels you feel vulnerable, right? There's this person yelling at you, and what can I do? And I think this is helpful to kind of understand the context about some remedy you might have around that. So that's helpful. And as board members are trying to follow the Brown Act, what are common places that they get tripped up in either correspondence or other things like that? Where do board members get kind of hung up?
I think that areas where I see the most confusion, perhaps, would be in areas relating to serial meetings where if you have a 5-member board, if one board member reaches out to 2 other board members, not at the same time necessarily, talking about the same issue, that then has triggered a quorum of the board, and then it is essentially a meeting. And so that is one area where I see a lot of inadvertent Brown Act violations. It's just accidental reaching out to too many people. Other areas that I think there are confusion about would be the ability for the board to teleconference in and what the rules are around that. When we had the COVID pandemic, there was a state of emergency, and it gave a lot of latitude for how teleconference could be used. Those really broad um, waivers of all the rules, those are no longer in play, and we have a lot more restrictions. And so I think that that's an area where a lot of the board does get sort of tripped up. Other things could just be notice requirements. So maybe somebody wants to get an item onto the board agenda, but the agenda's already been posted. Is there a way to change the agenda at that point? Can we change it in the meeting? And really, the answer is most of the time no. So
Right.
it's just a matter of understanding the rules around notice.
Yeah. No, that's really helpful. And so as a board member, if I'm talking to, I have friends on the board because we've served together for a while, and if I'm talking to one person about something that's going to be on our agenda, and then maybe I don't like their opinion, or I want to see if there's somebody else then I talk to another person, I'm creating that quorum, right? Because I'm talking to, if I'm on a 5-member board, just by talking to 2 of my friends, I'm creating a situation that's violating the Brown Act.
That's right. And that can be a big problem just in that specific example. Or if you have a staff member that sends a board packet out to the entire board and there's a way to reply to all by one of the board members, that then is triggering a meeting as well because it's communication amongst the board in a quorum of the board majority.
Right, and that's sort of a secret communication, right? Because not everybody has access to that email, so I'm hitting reply to all and saying, "I think this is a great idea, and we should also, blah, blah, blah," and then I'm talking about something that I need to talk about in open session.
That's right. And, it's not a meeting is not just when the board gets together to make a decision. It's when they get together to hear anyone else's opinion about it or receive information on an item or anything along those lines, even discussion amongst themselves. So just by mere the fact that somebody on the board is even asking about anything relating to the board packet would be a meeting if they're replying to all.
And I know you live in a very small town. I live in a smallish town, growing town, but it's easy for me to run into people on the board, and I run into them at a school event, or I run into them at the grocery store. I mean, that's common. And in that situation, what should I avoid talking about when I'm talking to them?
If you run into a board majority at the store, at a social function, whatever it is, if you're in that majority number, you are limited in that you cannot talk about anything within the school's jurisdiction. So whether that's the school calendar or anything related to the employee handbook or anything related to students, whatever it happens to be, you should not talk in that quorum in that setting because that would be a meeting and a Brown Act violation. So really talk about things that aren't school related.
So I could say, how are your families? How are your holidays? And then probably that's enough conversation and I need to move somewhere else in the
Mhm.
auditorium at that
Yeah,
winter sting or whatever it is, right?
exactly.
Yeah. Okay, good. That's helpful. So I was going to ask you. I have a sort of a crazy story I was going to tell you, and then I was going to ask you, and just if you, in your years of experience, if you've encountered things where board members are like, what were they thinking? Or, um, when our charter school was first starting, everybody on the board was brand new, and brand new to governance, brand new to charter schools, brand new to even having kids in school. We had kindergartners, right? So this was brand new. And I had one of my friends who was on the board was the secretary of the board, and we had in our charter said we were going to comply with the Brown Act, so we were doing all the things. And she took all the notes and she would send them out for us. We'd approve them at the meetings and all the information of who voted on what and all of that. And then a few years later, when the district went to try to shut down our school, we were supposed to prove about our meetings and following the Brown Act. And we asked her, where are these notes and these minutes you took? And she said, oh, well, I took them, but I didn't want to keep them. That's a lot of paperwork. So I threw them out. And we're like, you threw out. So that whole idea of taking the minutes or the actions, recording the actions and keeping them, right? Clearly we hadn't made that clear to, the expectations. Have you encountered any sort of mind-boggling experiences like that in your charter life?
Nothing quite like that. That's a good one. I suppose my craziest and probably most sad Brown Act experience through my charter world has been I had a school client who had a district that really wanted to revoke them and was looking for a reason. And a revocation can take place within any violation of law. And so one of the board members on the board had accidentally replied to all with very substantive comments about a board packet. So violated the Brown Act. And then because she was angry with the board president, turned that over to the district and got them revoked.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
That was a good one.
That was a good one. Yeah, that was a good one. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I've never heard of a board member turning on their own, but
Yeah.
it happens, I'm sure, obviously. Well, as we wrap up here today, and most of our listeners on the podcast are, are board members or folks maybe trying to be board members, what sort of advice or thoughts would you share with them as they continue on their journey of serving in schools?
I really would recommend that people try to take the training for Brown Act and take it seriously and really try to understand the reasons behind it so that following the Brown Act doesn't feel quite like a burden. It really is a public service and is just part of the process and the role that you are undertaking as a board member of a public charter school. And so try to stay awake during my trainings and and that's about it.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. That's great advice. And as I mentioned earlier, for people who aren't able to attend our conference and those sorts of things, we do have pre-recorded modules that they can listen to. And it's a lot of your words and my voice as a combo on there. But I think, like you said, it's useful, it's helpful, and yeah, if you can pay attention to it and stay awake during it, it's a benefit. So, yeah, so thank you. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining me here today on the podcast, and really appreciated all your insight and advice and helping to make governing easier for charter school board members. So thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you for having me.
This has been Boarding Pass from CSDC, the Charter Schools Development Center. Subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts, and share this podcast with your charter school board member friends. And don't worry if you didn't get it all, we took notes for you. View today's show notes and take a peek at the additional resources we've created for you. Just go to chartercenter.org/boardingpass. Thanks as always to Greg Hall, Mike Watson, Melissa Cabral, and today's guest, Jennifer McQuarrie. We'll see you next time on Boarding Pass.
Now that you've got your boarding pass to effective charter school governance, why not upgrade to first class? By becoming a member of the Charter Schools Development Center, you'll gain year-round access to expert guidance, cutting-edge resources, and a network of experienced charter advisors. CSDC membership is your fast track to excellence in charter school governance, offering personalized support and professional development opportunities that will help you and your school soar to new heights. Go to chartercenter.org/membership to learn more.